Hello, my name is Daniel Schoonmaker. I'm the Executive Director of West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our presentation today. For those that are not familiar with the organization, West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum is a collaboration of business institutions dedicated to promoting sustainable business practices with a focus on climate leadership, social justice, and circular economy. This is the fifth in our series of online discussions on how the coronavirus pandemic is impacting sustainability and sustainable business, and the first in our two-part Earth Week dialogues, with part two coming up this Thursday. How COVID-19 should elevate climate leadership, which will feature Beth Gibbons of the American Society for Adaptation Professionals, Mark LaCroix of Natural Capital Partners, and John Kinch of Michigan Energy Options. Then next week, we'll be talking about how to promote employee wellness and community sustainability through food systems among COVID-19 and beyond, which will feature Kate Lito of Experience Grand Rapids, Lisa Oliver King of Our Kitchen Table, and Garrett Ziegler of Michigan State University Extension. Videos of today's program and the prior sessions are available on demand at no cost. You'll receive a link to those with a feedback survey and any additional notes that come out of today's program shortly after our presentation wraps up today. Also, like to provide a save the date for people who are thinking about Earth. How to continue Earth Day once social distancing has lifting. Our sixth annual Triple Bottom Line Bash is on Wednesday, October 14th, 2020, which will be celebrating the Earth Day 50.5 at the High Five in Grand Rapids. Please save the date for that, and hope you plan to attend, hopefully in a relatively COVID-19 free environment. This series and all of our programs are primarily funded through membership donations. If you're not yet a member of our organization, I encourage you to become one today. There has never been a better time to do so or a greater need. To that effect, I'd like to recognize our latest corporate member this week, Plain Song Farm. Thank you to the staff at Plain Song Farm, who I believe are on our webinar today. You may also be interested in our various working groups which we organized on a dozen different topics of interest to our members and stakeholders, including our Equity and Sustainability Working Group, our Green Stormwater Infrastructure Task Force, and our new Prosperous Economy Working Group, all of which have meetings scheduled for April. As one last housekeeping item, applications are now being accepted for our board of directors until April 29 next week. If you have an interest, please check out our website to learn more. Now for today's program. Will the recovery be sustainable business? Please welcome our panelists for the day. Matt Flechter, Recycling Market Development Specialist for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. Alan Steinman, the Director of the Annis Water Resources Institute and Professor of Grand Valley State University. Bali Kumar, Chief Executive Officer of Lean & Green Michigan LLC. And my colleague, Carissa Petrone, Equity Program Manager, West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum. And I promise, Carissa, that your picture was in there as of 5 minutes ago, and I don't know what happened with that. So thank you all for joining us today. Before we get underway, would you mind introducing yourselves and what brings you to our roundtable today? Al, would you like to go first there?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Dan. Well, you bring me here today. But seriously, beyond that, I think we all know that water is part of Michigan's identity. And as a consequence, with the focus on water these days, it was quantity 10 years ago when we were dealing with bottled water and possibly moving water out of the area before the Great Lakes Compact. Now it's water quality with PFAS and flint issues, lead exposures. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity right now as we go into hopefully the post-recovery very soon about dealing with water management, water infrastructure that can help sustain our economic recovery around water, which is the principal factor in why a lot of us live here in Michigan.
Thank you, Al. Matt, Bali, Carissa.
I'll go next. Hey, gang. Matt Flechter. with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. I put a tie on for you today. I looked in my closet and I saw that my recycling tie seemed a little lonely, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to get it out and use it. Recycling is an important part of our economy in Michigan. And I think COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of why recycling is not just an important environmental issue, but it's also an economic issue and a supply chain issue. And I've had many conversations over the past few weeks of people having aha moments of, oh, you mean toilet paper comes from recycled materials? Oh no. And it's been really interesting to see what I see as an important pivot in our environmental and sustainability industry, the work that we all do on this call, because it's opening people's eyes to the importance of sustainable systems. And I'm looking forward to talking more about that today. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate you being here. Bali, can you talk a little about your work?
Yeah, totally. All right. So Bali Kumar, CEO of Leaning Green Michigan. We're the statewide PACE administrator. PACE is Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a type of financing for commercial and industrial properties to do energy efficiency upgrades, renewable energy upgrades, water conservation upgrades on their existing properties. So it helps people fund expensive retrofits. And the financing goes out up to 25 years. So it makes it quite cheap to pay back, because when you have a 25-year assessment, then it's a much smaller yearly payback than if you go to a bank or, use another mechanism that gives you maybe a 7-year loan. So, obviously I'm very invested in a recovery. I think we all are, if not directly, then at least indirectly. But I'm hearing a lot from property owners who want to make their recovery greener, mostly because it's accretive to their bottom lines. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I want to convey here today.
Thank you so much, Bali. Carissa.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris. I'm the Equity Program Manager for the West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and I'm here today to give you a little bit of the perspective on disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 and talking about and centering around racial equity. I lead the forum's social justice and equity work, both internally and externally, and I also lead the forum sustainability and equity working group if you're interested in joining us.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, everyone. I think a good place to start this discussion is to sort of take measure of where we are today. We've seen a lot of resources and a lot of money being poured into the pandemic response and economic stability. To my knowledge, none of that is going towards infrastructure, circularity, or environmental investments, yet at least. And appearances suggest that resources would be allocated towards such investments are getting clawed back for emergency needs. And I think we're seeing that in both the public and private sectors. So are you seeing that as well? Are resources presently being diverted from sustainability initiatives? Matt, you're involved with some funds right now that I know a number of people on the call are likely interested in hearing about. Would you like to get us started off on that?
For sure. Thanks, Dan. We do have 2 grants out on the street right now that were announced a couple months ago, pre-COVID. And those are the infrastructure grants available for communities and nonprofits to increase access and recovery of recycled materials. So buying trucks and carts and other equipment to better manage recyclable materials, as well as the market development grants. And those help to circulate material back into the economy, into Michigan's economy, identifying ways to do research and build infrastructure to capture those materials and put them back circulating into products made here in Michigan and the region. Those are really important for the recovery and making sure that we continue the good work that's being done by communities and businesses will help us through our resiliency. What we've seen is we look back at some of our recycling program grants, and we weren't thinking COVID. I don't think anybody was, but we can really point to the strong support of having programs that are resilient. One of the examples that I've used is the CART grants, where we've worked in partnership with the recycling partnership and supplied carts to recycling programs. And those programs are better able to manage a COVID situation because they are automated collection. So there's a lot of parity and connection to the recycling programs that we're working to develop with robotics and automated collection that are going to make those grants even more important. And that's really up to us on this call and in the state to make the case that these dollars are important for recovery. And that said, there has been a pause. Everybody's this is early on, Dan. Like we're trying to figure out where we're at, what the economic impact's going to be, and state government has, without a doubt, paused any additional contracts. But that doesn't mean that's going to remain forever. And it's up to us on this call to make the case that these dollars are important for recovery.
Yeah, I agree. And from the private sector perspective, what I'm seeing is that a lot of, commercial industrial property owners that have money set aside for capital improvements every year, this year, I doubt that folks are going to just go on business as usual with their capital improvements. That money might end up having to float the business. But the folks who are managing the property are realizing maybe we have a really old boiler, or maybe, there are various energy efficiency upgrades that could be done, and various mechanisms that could implement sustainability that would help them save money both this year and going forward. And when it helps improve the bottom line, I'm seeing folks at properties really push to implement even just the low-hanging fruit that makes a building marginally more sustainable, because it helps them save money in a time where cash is starting to become king.
Alan, what are your thoughts? Thoughts? Are you seeing at least a temporary diversion away from sustainability and infrastructure investments towards emergency needs presently?
I think, I'm probably not the right person to be answering that question, but I can tell you that certainly university operations have been put on hold. So the research that we would normally be doing that would help inform the decisions being made dealing with sustainability are on hold as well. So it's a difficult time for us in that regard. As far as investments, in that respect, I really can't answer intelligently.
Okay, Chris, any thoughts there?
I think that through our membership specifically, we've seen a little bit of how the programming has shifted from, a more environmental focus to that social pillar of sustainability, and really focusing on leveraging the resources that each business has to invest in community and invest in those who are the most impacted throughout this crisis, but also those who are the most under-resourced. So we've seen that kind of through Spectrum Health, for example, and their sustainability programming, how they've been able to kind of morph into, focusing on the donation side of things and gathering PPE for all of their employees and whatnot. So even though the programs have shifted a little bit away from the environmental side of things, I think that social piece of sustainability is still kind of comes to the forefront.
Dan, I want to add that I think that those companies or businesses or universities or cities that are able to pivot quickly into a COVID type response and articulate the message that these responses are actually about sustainability, having strong community structures, economic and environmental support, and then be able to align the work that they're doing with the common goal of protecting health and safety, I think that's where we're going to see the most success. So programs that are and universities and other programs that are able to kind of look at the activities that they're doing right now, whether it's making something out of recycled textiles, or creating that supply chain so that the paper can continue to be made into boxes and toilet paper. For as an example, if they're able to talk about that in terms of a health and safety response, those programs are going to be able to secure and hold those dollars for those purposes better than others that are like, I don't even have the time to think about this. Let somebody else deal with it. So I would encourage all of you to think about that as you're working to pivot your programs in this new COVID world.
Yeah, and then Matt, I am getting a little bit of feedback from you specifically, just as an FYI. I don't quite know what that might be. For our attendees, please note that you can share thoughts with the panelists or all attendees to the chat function, and you can also ask questions through the Q&A field if you'd like. Now, building off of Matt's comments there, we've seen within our members and other stakeholders across the board that there has been at least a short-term diversion away from clean energy, recycling, clean water, and even say the furloughing of personnel responsible for many of those initiatives. Do you expect those to bounce back when we're clear of it? And how can we encourage both the public and private sector to recognize the value of those things in the near term here?
All right.
Bali?
I'll jump right in. I think, and this is something I've actually heard from a sustainability director, is that right now he views it as he's fighting to prove his worth to the company. And so he is actively engaged in coming up with ways, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but where the company benefits by having him on staff and managing a sustainability project that results in reduction to the operating expenses that are greater than the investment into it, right? So he's looking at a $800,000 upgrade to an office building. Obviously, since people aren't in the office, he wants to try to push it through before people start coming back into the office. You don't have to kick everyone out, do a deep retrofit, and the savings needs $800,000 plus his salary. He's like, hey, look, I not only paid for myself, but I'm creating more savings than the cost of this is year to year. So he's trying to create a way to use sustainability to create a cash flow for the company.
Yeah, thanks. Any other thoughts?
Well, I think Matt's right about having to be nimble when it comes to these kinds of issues. When we look at the water infrastructure issues in Michigan, which are quite severe, whether it's dealing with drinking water, wastewater, dams, stormwater, whatever it might be, there's tremendous opportunities and there's needs that are there. And so we do have to make the case as to why the investment what kind of return on investment you're going to get for these kinds of issues. But when you have people that don't have clean drinking water, when you have wastewater treatment systems that are leaking, if these things were above ground instead of underground, people would be demanding that we upgrade them. But because we don't see them, those upgrades don't happen, and people don't want to pay the taxes. So the onus is on us to convince the public that these taxes are a good investment. And now's the opportunity coming out of these kinds of issues where money might be potentially available for these upgrades. Certainly Michigan's 21st Century Infrastructure Commission showed what those needs are. And there just hasn't been the impetus to make that happen. And I think we need to make that case because this is really the future for our state. Some of these drinking water systems are 50 to 100 years old, and they really need to be upgraded dramatically.
Chris, any thoughts before we get off here?
Yeah, I've got a thought. More good, less bad. So we've got a lot of really good stuff in Michigan happening right now in the sustainability space. and we can look to those programs that are most resilient and learn from them. Those that have good practices, good policies, good funding mechanisms, good connections with their local markets, and do more of that. So it's not all doom and gloom right now. There's a lot of really good stuff happening, and there's work to be done. COVID has shined a light on some parts of the supply chain and the materials, specifically in recycling, where we've got gaps, where we're not, or we're maybe too reliant on, our structures aren't adaptable quickly enough. We've had some recycling programs closed down, especially, I mean, as we've seen in West Michigan, all the good work that they're doing. There's a lot of material making its way not into the supply chain because we don't have redundancy built in. So we can learn from that and build that infrastructure out. And I would say that we've been doing a heck of a lot of work over the past few years to grow that infrastructure and make the case that it's important to capture those materials. So what this does is it just shines a light on the need to do more good stuff that we're doing.
I definitely agree with Matt and how, just months previous, there were some things that we never thought could have potentially happened. Like, for example, now with oil prices being so low to them at some point being negative $37 per barrel, that's something that was unprecedented, along with the fact that, there are studies coming out from Harvard around, an increased exposure to particulate matter in the air basically increases your chance of dying from COVID. There are a lot of different studies and data and different mechanisms that have kind of been, like Matt said, kind of been shown light. I think that there's really an opportunity for a reinvestment in creating a more sustainable and equitable future through systems, like Matt said, through supply chains, whether it's transportation, and then even, some things like we never thought would be possible. Some of us thought that we might not ever be able to work from home are now. So there are a lot of opportunities here within this crisis to re-examine this future of what we would like to see in this world moving forward.
Great, thank you, Chris, and everyone. We're going to loop back in a few minutes to the resiliency and health and safety and preparedness topic that Al started to introduce with the infrastructure discussion. Now, when we started this topic a few weeks ago, we were discussing the so-called silver lining of the coronavirus and whether the measured environmental improvements that have been documented would have a lasting impact. Then we continued last week with our examination of disproportionate impacts and whether this might be a wake-up call to address economic inequality. And whatever happens next, I think we know there is going to be some type of recovery. I mean, there just has to. Can we talk about why it's important for sustainable business and sustainability, or equity even, to be part of those investments in the way that we recover and redevelop our economy?
You really wanted us to preach to this choir here, don't we all? I mean, I think that if you're on this call, maybe we talk about it in terms of how you convince other people that this is important.
Fair enough.
And I alluded to it earlier when I've had some really interesting conversations. I had a call from a legislator who, I know he was thinking about recycling as something you do in the good times, not as like a luxury. He's a Democratic legislator, and he was, I think, thinking about sustainability and energy and water and waste and recycling, sort of in terms of, okay, now we have a crisis. We have to deal with a crisis, and we'll get to that whole recycling sustainability thing later. And it was really interesting to watch or to listen to him take that pivot and see that it's all that sustainability and energy savings and water quality and job creation is all built into the sustainability work that we do. And so I would say, all of you on the call, think about those specific stories that you can tell about the jobs or the water savings or the energy savings, so that it's really, really clear for somebody to see that. I used the toilet paper example already. Somebody in the chat just a minute ago asked if I could explain redundancy a little bit more. I used that one on the call as well. We've got paper markets that aren't able to get enough paper. They are bringing it in from far away, with all the climate impacts that go with that. Meanwhile, we're sending paper to a landfill in Michigan. Well, why is some of that not being collected? It's really because we need to strengthen our systems and have a little bit more redundancy in those collection programs, so that if one goes down, there can be another way to capture that material. We've seen that in curbside and drop off. We've seen that specifically on the organic side. Some communities have decided, well, we can't manage curbside, but we still want to provide opportunities to communities. So how do we provide a drop-off network for yard clippings, for example? But really, to circle back to really good concrete stories about why sustainability matters for jobs and water quality and air quality and energy is what we've been doing for so long. And now we just have lots of other opportunities to do that.
Al, would you like to tell us anything about the blue economy and how this fits in?
I think it's a very nice match. Obviously, when we talk about the economic sector in Michigan, the water is a really important part of it, both directly and indirectly. And what we've seen in the studies that we've done have shown that where we have made restoration efforts, basically the real estate housing comes back first and comes back in a big way, the hedonics, as a function of that. But even downtowns, as they start to restore their downtown areas, whether it's Grand Rapids or whether it's Bay City or Manistee, all of them have seen recovery associated with taking advantage of the waterways. Whereas in the past, we turn our back to the water. Now we turn our front to the water because we recognize it's an important resource. And making sure that that's sustainable in terms of water quality. Obviously, the better the water quality, the more the real estate values are going to improve and the more jobs are going to be associated with it. One of the things we've really seen in Muskegon, which I think was not fully appreciated as part of restoring Muskegon Lake from basically what was a former dumping ground into something that's now being used for recreation, is the community pride that's been restored. In the past, people really avoided the lake and they used to downplay the lake and use it in really deleterious terms. And now there's a whole new community pride that's been registered as associated with that restoration. And I think that's something that we're seeing throughout the state in the recognition of this blue economy, not just in Michigan, but in the Great Lakes as a whole. And there's a real positive there associated with that. And it's, I think, one of the real transitions that's moving us forward and something that we can look forward to in the future.
Carissa, Bali, any further thoughts?
I just want to chime in and generally agree. I think obviously sustainability is the right thing to do, and preaching to the choir, so don't need to convince folks that it's the right thing to do. I think it's also the smart thing to do, and so I think times like these help us really brainstorm how to be smarter, because there are always ways we can improve on the messaging, on the process. So for instance, right, if we're wasting a whole bunch of a bunch of paper that's going to landfills and it could be recycled, then, that's one way that we can get smarter about it. So let's always use times like this to get smarter.
And I definitely think that now is kind of the time to reevaluate our systems and structures put into place who have been disproportionately impacting communities for years. These inequities are not new, especially health inequities within our systems due to social determinants of health, whether it's from redlining to gentrification, blatant racism within a lot of our systems. I think that we do have the opportunity to really reevaluate who is being denied resources at this moment, who is most at risk, who is most on the front lines, and what we can do together to leverage that. So whether it's acting on policy or forming coalitions to come together to really address these issues, we know that the governor has just yesterday signed an executive order creating the Michigan Coronavirus Task Force on Racial Disparities, but that will only last 90 days after the declared state of emergency will be out of effect. So how do we continue this momentum and movement moving forward, not just focusing on the now, but really focusing on the future and recreating those systems that we have in place right now?
I think that's true for all of these aspects that we're talking about. And you bring up an interesting point, Chris, because one of the issues we are facing as we restore these waterfront areas is public access. And often it's the communities that are disadvantaged that have the most difficulty reaching these spots. And as it becomes privatized, there's fewer and fewer locations that are available to the public. So that's something that we need to build in either to our ordinances or into the way that we restore these areas to make sure that that access is available in the future for all communities.
So let's talk about resiliency for a minute. I can say I didn't have super flu as on my list of what I thought was going to take everything down. Earlier this year, we were investing a lot in programming and talking about high water levels was going to be the defining issue of 2020, and little did we know. But when we think through it, the same investments that we're making to address climate change or the amount of fecal matter that's in our water systems or any of these various other issues, they do seem to make our communities and industries more adaptable to all emergent threats and disasters. Can we unpack that a little bit and think about, as Matt says, how we build redundancies and resiliency and adaptability into our systems through a sustainability lens?
Boy, I think the high water level is a great example of how we're not doing it the way we need to. Obviously, these homes are at risk and people's livelihoods are tied up in those homes, so they need to do whatever they can to basically fortify their areas that are being eroded right now. But when you talk about how waves move, how kinetic energy moves in Lake Michigan or Lake Huron or wherever it might be, putting in these kinds of reinforcements really just moves the energy further downstream and causes more power for greater erosion. So it's a really difficult situation because you can't deny these people the ability to try and save their homes. That's really, really powerful. But on the other hand, when you think about if you're trying to modify nature by doing it in this way, it's really not the long-term solution. It's not very resilient. And so I don't know how you balance those competing needs. Often what happens is the more immediate human needs trump the other concerns, and figuring out how to build that into our community structure, into our thinking process, into the way that we govern these issues is really, it's now social science, it's psychology. It's no longer physical or natural science that we're trying to deal with. And changing human behavior is really, really difficult.
I don't know, maybe I'm being too much of an optimist here, but I think that, which can get annoying, I know. But I think that COVID is shining a light on a lot of the resiliency that was already built in. It's not as though we weren't talking about health and safety in the recycling industry before, with fires and sharps. I mean, this is just a different health and safety thing. And so having health and safety training, having employees, having support for employees on making sure that they're safe with PPE. It's not as though there wasn't PPE already being used in a lot of our industries. So it's just shining a light on its importance in many ways. So there's that. There's also this opportunity to tell the story of resiliency, to talk about how we in our industry, even though nobody saw this coming, we we have been talking about food systems and the integrated and how systems are connected with water and food and equity. You've been doing this work for so long, Dan. You've had webinars that have talked about the complex systems that we all work in and how we're all interdependent. And this is just highlighting that. It's just telling the story that, yes, sending organics on a one-way trip to a landfill is a bad idea. We should be feeding people, or getting food waste out of, not calling it food waste anymore. And looking at those resources that are available. It's the same work that we've been doing. We're just using a different example.
I agree. I think, prevention is cheaper than replacement. And yes, it does cost some money to do some preventative work, to make structures more resilient, to make society more resilient, but it's much cheaper than letting the status quo live on until disaster strikes. So in the event that there's a homeowner, losing a home, that's disaster striking, and that's way more expensive than just fortifying what exists now.
I think too that within our community specifically, we've seen how not only businesses and entities, but how individuals have stepped up to help the community become more resilient, whether it's, kind of tooling whatever resources they have, whether it be monetary or, in regards to their time through volunteering. I think that there are investments that individuals and organizations are both making in regards to resiliency, but I think we all should re-examine what our systems have done and what policies have been put into place or not to whether exacerbate or help this this crisis. And I think that it's a moral imperative to really focus on the protection of our people, whether that's through, the basic rights to life, healthcare, housing, water, a livable wage, electricity. There are so many things that we definitely need to put into place so that our structures moving forward don't only help those who already have resources, but really focus on those who are historically under-resourced.
So the last time there was a major federal stimulus, the Obama administration at the time invested quite heavily in clean energy, energy efficiency, infrastructure. And I think I'm probably not going to ask the question at this point, but I'm going to assume we're all on the same page that we're going to expect to see some type of stimulus from both the state and the federal governments, and that this is an opportunity to reshape our economy towards the better. So I'm hopeful on the topic of such funds, and assuming that there's going to be a lot of more momentum towards investments like that. Can you help make a pitch for certain investments, and do we have a wish list for Michigan investments and initiatives, things that maybe I can just start penciling down and saying that this is what we should be seeing. We should be seeing our job creation go towards. Any takers?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to kick this off. I don't want to say too much, but actually jotted down some notes before this question came out. So honestly, on the federal level, I'm a part of an organization called Pace Nation. I'm on the board, and Pace Nation has presence in Washington, D.C. So they've been pushing for things like expanding the investment tax credit, extending the investment tax credit, making energy efficiency and water and resiliency improvements fully tax deductible. That would stimulate more folks to look into this sort of thing. they're looking at some stuff on depreciation rules, because with a minor change to some of the depreciation rules, people can accelerate their depreciation for energy efficiency upgrades and other sustainability and resiliency upgrades. So I think that, these are things that on the federal level, folks can do that would stimulate this sort of work in Michigan, but also nationwide. Statewide, there's chatter about amending the commercial PACE legislation to make it a bit easier for folks to receive financing to do energy efficiency and water conservation and renewable energy upgrades to their properties. Michigan has done about $37 million in commercial PACE financing for these sorts of upgrades, but nationwide, over $1.5 billion worth of projects have been financed. So I guess the question is, why is Michigan slow? And it's because the statute is very stringent. So there's some amendments there. I've had folks reach out and say, well, why can't homeowners take advantage of PACE financing? Because a lot of homeowners are really energy burdened. Their utility bills are super high relative to their income, and it would be great to do any minuscule amount of work that makes their properties more sustainable. It puts people to work. It helps folks with with their expenses on a month-to-month basis. So it's a smart thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Obviously, the part of the budget that pushes for more money for Michigan Saves, in a similar vein, that's helpful. And the wish list would be to approve that. Always working with the good folks at Eagle to come up with better ideas. So this is really a time for us to push for the moon or for the stars.
The sky. I think Bali hit the nail on the head. From a water perspective, I think, fully funding the revolving fund for drinking water, low interest loans so that we can upgrade our drinking water systems and our wastewater systems are things that we put people to work and improve our infrastructure and improve the health of the people in Michigan. So to me, those are no-brainers, but it takes funding to do that.
Yeah, do you remember when the ARA funds came out and it seemed like everybody was saying shovel ready this, shovel ready that? We're about to go back into that world, and I would say shovel ready funding mechanisms and projects like Bali and Al have just mentioned are important. Robert Jackson and Chad Rogers and a handful of others at Eagle have been talking about how we can be ready for when that question is asked. This is the first time I've been asked this in a public forum, so thanks for that, Dan, because I think it's important to get all of these 77 people on the call right now to think about what that is and what the needs are. Last thing you want is Eagle or government coming up with, the mechanism to help you with your needs. Let's think about this as a group. Where can we inject funds in to get the best job growth, the best environmental, protection, the best greenhouse gas reduction, the best water quality? Let's think about those things. And to that end, there has been some conversations. I don't want to go too deep into this, but one of my major goals is to build more partnerships with industry, with the brand owners, making sure that we can leverage our state dollars with their brand dollars to get the best infrastructure in place. And there has been some work done with Sabanow's office on the Recycle Act. Just had a call last week about this. And maybe there's a way with the Recycle Act and the Recover Act, which are both related to recycling, making sure the infrastructure and education dollars are there. Maybe plugging that into, that's a ready-made, discussed, generally agreed upon mechanism. It's just how do you get the funding and how do you do it quickly? Maybe that's a way to plug that in. That's been conversations that we've heard from different brand owners, meaning, the people that make packaging. They're interested in that and then having to leverage those dollars. So that's one idea that you could put on the list, but I'd be more interested in hearing what the group thinks about that.
I think one last thing that I would add would just be to have a more intentional focus on the actions that are taking forward now and what we've done to become more resilient within our systems, but also applying that to the climate crisis. I know we'll have a more intentional conversation about that on Thursday, but um, I would like to just pose that question of what does flattening the climate curve look like? Is it a heavy investment in renewable energy? Is it, more intentional investments in whether it's a carbon tax, or is it policy, or is it all of the above? And how can we all play that role in flattening that curve as well?
Great, thank you, everyone. Now let's hear some questions from our audience. Matt, I think this would be a pretty quick one. Somebody's very interested in how do you find out more about the grants you mentioned earlier in the call.
For sure. Let me give a shout out to Jeff Kirchmerrick and Elizabeth Garber, Emily Freeman, and Brian Burke, who are the recycling specialists that can help you on the infrastructure grant that closes at the end of this month. So the time is short on that one. And then the market development grant is, you can contact me directly. Hopefully you can share my contact information. You can contact me directly on any of these questions, but go to the Eagle Recycling webpage, and there's a grants tab, and both grants are posted there. And we are in discussion. We're accelerating our discussions this year so that we're best able to respond to COVID and get the funding out into the funding for recycling infrastructure and markets and education out into communities as soon as possible. As soon as that, what we talked about at the beginning, our restrictions are lifted and we're able to move those forward. But we're in the process of developing that. Stay tuned. Get on the web page or the Gov delivery page, little red envelope on the Eagle website to get alerts to your inbox.
Yeah, we talked a bit about shovel-ready projects earlier in the call, and I think we identified a few examples of that, and it seemed like we're moving into a phase where we should start encouraging people to think about that. Can we explore a little further by what process we should go about identifying those, and if people are on the call today or are talking to people who are in positions to bring those forward, by what means we can identify and elevate such shovel-ready projects? Any ideas therein?
Dan, are you talking about a prioritization kind of scheme, or are you talking about a conceptual approach to doing that? I'm a little confused as to the intent of your question.
Yeah, I'm trying to interpret a few things coming from the audience. How should we go about identifying shovel-ready projects? By what process should those start coming to the forefront now?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I look at it in two layers. There's shovel-ready mechanisms is where I'm at right now. And that's some of the things that Bali and Al had mentioned, and I mentioned with the Recover and Recycling Act at a Stabeno's office. And those are sort of mechanisms to inject the funds. And then there's this whole other layer, and that needs to be built into whatever those recovery dollars, the project is. One of the things that we look at Eagle, in addition to recycling rate and waste diversion, we look at outcome metrics. So what are the outcomes of any given funding that are desired? Meaning jobs, climate reduction, water quality, energy savings. These are all things that are outcomes of growing a better sustainable waste and materials management system. And so I would encourage that any program look at those outcomes. Let's have a set of, in the environmental space, let's have a set of agreed upon outcomes and and think about those. And I would just, say climate, water quality, energy savings, jobs created would be where I would go with those.
That's a good point, Matt. One of the things, because I've been involved in reviewing GLRI proposals, one of the things we also look at is how the time factor, how long will that benefit? How long will those outcomes provide a benefit? Is it immediate? Is it long-term? And factor that into the prioritization in determining whether they're fundable or not and whether they're worthy. So there are a lot of criteria to consider, but I think the ones you've identified make perfect sense.
Holly, Carissa, do you have anything to add there?
I think also within whatever projects we have moving forward, I think evaluating them with a racial equity lens, doing those impact assessments on who is going to be impacted by all of these, whether it's infrastructure development or otherwise, who is going to be most impacted by these projects, and how are we moving forward with elevating community voice within that whole entire process, not just at the end, but from the very beginning. But also, for sure, investing in job creation, but making sure that suppliers are diverse and that communities across the board have equal opportunity to invest in these projects and also become a part of them.
Dan, we should really come up with something like a triple bottom line or something like that. I don't know if you. I think looking at all of those factors, economic, social, and environmental. I mean, that's what you do. That's what we do here. Let's make sure that what would be really cool. This is a crazy idea. What if all of the funds thought about, not just like you had talked about the dollars for sustainability efforts, but what if we looked at all of the funds through a sustainability lens in equity and environment and economics? That is something we should push for.
So I think you would have buy-in here towards that. So as we kind of wrap up the conversation today, start thinking about our wish list and shovel ready projects, both the public and private space. Starting with the public sector space, where should people start directing their attention to at this moment, and in particular decision makers and those who may require some influence and helping them make the right decisions?
If I can step back 1 second, Dan, I think one of the issues that we face is that people often don't really think about these problems until it hits them directly. And as a consequence, they look at these issues and say, well, yeah, that would be great if we could fix that. But if they're personally affected, whether it's COVID or whether it's, PFAS or whatever it might be, then they take a much greater interest. So one of the things that we need to deal with is educating the public so that they recognize that these issues really have societal value for future generations as well as current generations, so that they get more involved, they get more invested, and they get really behind some of these things, whatever it is that we identify as being the priorities.
Well said. Any other thoughts there?
I think it's a great time to keep up with any relationships with any elected officials. And, I think they're looking to us for guidance on what to do with the next set of, stimulus packages. And I think we need to be letting them know, because other folks who have other interests are definitely letting them know.
Does anyone have any final thoughts today?
I just have one final thought. It seems like there might have been some questions that we haven't gotten to. And I would just, please, there's 70 people on the call right now. I'm available to talk about this stuff. I can connect you with the recycling specialists or other people in the sustainability unit at Eagle. I really appreciate all the work that you do, that you're at this time of crisis, spending the time to get on the call and think about this planning and think about how we message this, and what Valerie just said, how we talk to our elected officials. I think it's a good sign that you're all on this call. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, and I say that there was to mention, there was one specific question about if the situation is making businesses more willing to pay for materials that are locally sourced instead of internationally sourced. And I think that'd be an interesting topic to explore a little further as we in a future discussion here. And Polly, I interrupted you, so please.
No worries. I was going to say, I'm also happy to talk to anyone on this call or anyone who's not on this call about how to pay for sustainability upgrades. That there are various tools out there. I'm happy to walk folks through some of the tools, or push them in the right direction. I think it's the right thing to be doing, but it might be a little tough to navigate it. So I'll drop my information in the chat box.
Thanks you. Al, Chris, any final thoughts?
I would just add that as a final thought, I think that we all, whether you're representing a business or organization, yourself as an individual, I think that we all have a role to play in this co-creation of what we would like our future to look like moving forward. And there are various ways to get involved even today in reimagining that future. So I look forward to some of you getting more involved and continuing this conversation.
I just want to say thank you, Dan, for organizing this, to my esteemed panel members for making this very provocative, and to the audience that's listening. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. And so thank you to our panelists. If we were doing this live, I would hand you some beer from our sponsors right now, but so I'm going to have to do an IOU. And we're hopeful to get together in person at some point in the not too distant future here. If you found our talk valuable today, I'd like to share a few news with all of our attendees to get further involved. It is Earth Week, and we're hopeful to honor any organization's volunteers who continue to celebrate Earth Week virtually. Please do tag us on social media or send an email to one of our staff to let us know what you're up to, so we can recognize those. And also, please keep an eye out for our newsletter and social media channels to some of the things that us and our members are up to. Also, I mentioned earlier our new Prosperous Economy Working Group. That is a new task force that we're launching that will ideally impact some of the issues some of the issues that we've talked about today, on how to better shape our economy in a more just and sustainable way, ideally in forming some future policy investments. If that is something that you're interested in, and this is a statewide opportunity, please keep an eye out for that, and we'd love to have you. Also, and this was suggested by a number of stakeholders going to this call, we'd love to put together a list of potential shovel-ready projects that we can perhaps circulate to some of our state and federal leaders in the not too distant future here in a soft suggestion type of way. So if you have ideas, please get in touch with our organization, or from the sound of it, any one of our panelists today. And finally, thank you all for taking the time out of your busy days to join us, and thank you our panelists for the same. And I hope to see many of you again on Thursday for our next webinar. So please enjoy your afternoon, and happy Earth Week.
Thanks, Dan. Look forward to taking you up on that beer.
Take care.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.